Okay. Another YouTube venture on the therapy series. So I'm getting to the slideshow, which should be present. Instead of seeing my wonderful mug, you're looking at the PowerPoint, hopefully. Okay, yeah, this is a continuation of my therapy series, part 5, defining the therapeutic relationship or alliance. Um, this is for adults, and more particularly, this is for adults in the mental health field. I use a lot of psychobabble, like we like to talk psychobabble, because that is the lingo of the field. So it helps to be in the mental health field to understand it. Um, this is for not for kids, although it's not should be rated G. But anyway, okay, I want to introduce myself for you that haven't seen any of the videos. Um, I am Dr. Mark Carriage. I've been around for 45 years or so. I need to change that number. I got my bachelor's degree in 1979 from SIU Edwardsville. I did start in 1976. We were on quarters, so I was able to finish in 3 years. In other words, I took full time classes around the entire year for 3 years. I kind of thought everybody did it, only to find out that I was probably one of the few that did it. And I did go to SIU 3 weeks out of high school. Yes, I was a kid. Okay, so I then entered the master's program in '81. I graduated from '81. Entered in 1979, St. Louis University. Graduated in 1981 in counseling. Then in 1985, got my PhD in counseling. Both graduate degrees were from St. Louis University in St. Louis. Um, I did attend and complete a counseling psychology internship at Texas Tech University in Lubbock, Texas from '84 to '85. So I've been with the prison system for 40 years or so. I think I quit. Going down there is just too much for me. At any rate, you can call me Dr. Mark. I've been called a number of things by all kinds of people in the system, from the top to the bottom, in terms of social status and rank. Okay, I am currently working in a private practice under Chad Welch at Metro East Counseling, located in Swansea, Illinois. We are in the Metro East of St. Louis, Missouri, on the Illinois side. I'm doing some part-time consulting with TCI in developing, redeveloping, enhancing their program with youth. Okay, so call me Dr. Mark, call me Dr. C, call me whatever. I also want to do mention, since we're talking about therapy, that I had the privilege and honor to travel with my father to a couple different conferences and workshops, um, and a couple in the early mid '80s, the American Society of Clinical Hypnosis workshops and conferences, where I met the best of the world in hypnotherapy and therapy of that era, except for the great Dr. Milton H. Erickson. He was older and I was younger, and he passed away. I missed him. So I want to say also, a lot of people have invested in me over time in both fields, therapy and sexual aggression, and it's my time to give back. I still have time, and this is part of that series. Um, so, at any rate, I could be reached. The important thing is at mcarich at AOL.com. Matt Adams is the one that's inspired me, that got me going on all of this, but he's not present for today's situation. Okay, intro to the module. And then if you want, I'll send you my CV, I'll send you PowerPoints, whatever. But you got to contact me through email. Do not try calling me, because I will not answer my phone if I do not recognize the number. People are trying to sell me everything, including my own rear end, and that is not for sale, folks. I even had to tell a guy that. Speaking of therapeutic relationship and group in early 1990, a young guy who was 20 said I had a nice ass. I said, well, don't worry about it. You ain't getting none. Now let's do group. I mean, I guess I could have made a big deal about it. Maybe I should have made a big deal about it. But anyway, it's all part of the therapeutic relationship. So, what are we going to talk about today in this short module? We're going to talk about the therapeutic relationship or alliance, whatever you want to call it, and how the process works. Different little caveats about it. That connection with the client is that we're going to get into some detail of definitions and elements, dynamics, and elements of the intimacy aspects, and also transference and countertransference are briefly alluded to. So I'm from the old school of 2,000 years ago, where we called it therapeutic relationship. It seems like newer people like to call it alliance because a guy named Borden um, wrote a paper in '79 on it, called it the therapeutic alliance. I still like the therapeutic relationship, so let's define it. It's an emotional, psychological connection or an engagement or a contact, if you will, a therapeutic context, where the therapist helps the client create a change manifested in different number of ways. So there's levels and experiential domains within the client. But let's look at the different uh, tidbits about the relationship. There's the bonding process. There's the degree of intimacy with boundaries, collaboration. There's levels of attachment with boundaries, and boundaries define the roles in the context by the both overt, covert rules of engagement. So, besides Alan Rogers and other people on board, they support the therapeutic alliance. About everybody does now. Even the behaviorists are saying we always did believe in the therapeutic alliance. All bullshit. They didn't at the beginning. It was pretty cut and dry behavioral um, conditioning, but now they have embraced the alliance as being very important, which it is. So the classical components, client and therapist agreement on goals. This is what it's about. It's really about creating change. As the therapist helps the client move in the change direction. It's about accomplishing tasks and goals, the agreement on that. Develop It's actually a development of interpersonal bond. But Borden said, and Ward and them concur that there's three different aspects. You have the collaborative nature, you have the effective bond between the client and therapist, and the ability for both to agree on what's going on, like goals, tasks, this and that and the other. So, more definition, because we really got to get to the heart of the matter. And so, the heart of the matter is really an emotional, psychological connection, engagement, rapport, if you will, in the therapeutic context, in which the therapist helps the client create a change, which can be manifested in any number of ways, levels, experiential domains, etc. Okay, so there's a bonding process with boundaries, firmness with support, um, again, some directiveness with even directiveness via indirective. I don't want to get off on that whole diving board. But anyway, this involves psychological contract or connection with boundaries. There's a degree of cooperation. There's a distinct roles in the relationship. Responsibility for the change is equally defined. But I say equally, but I'm not a statistician by any far. I can't even do freaking math, bro. But anyway, um, the responsibilities are divided with the therapist and client with differences because the therapist has the responsibility of creating a change context where the client actually has to make the changes. Now, what goes into the change context is a number of things, including your interventions, your style, your model, if you will, or integrated model, how you're thinking about it, the interventions you select to use, and how you deliver them. And of course, developing, and a key word is maintaining rapport with the client. I used to think blindly that, oh, I have rapport with the client and I forgot to like keep it going. You got to maintain it. And the client is actually responsible to be not only receptive to the therapeutic messages, but to make the changes. Now, it is also the therapist's responsibility to help the client be receptive to change. The client comes in, says A, B, C, D needs to change in my life, blah, blah, blah. Here's the problems, A, B, C, D. And so, but a lot of clients are really reluctant to dive in, including me. So, there's a number of dynamics at play involved in the therapeutic alliance, including power and control versus cooperation, well, cooperative relationship. Interesting. I had a client, the psychiatrist referred to him as a patient, got into an argument with the psychiatrist on whose reality is best. Now, the client's official diagnosis back then, I think it was DSM 3R, which means the Bible had been revised. At any rate, the client was insisting that his reality was just as good as the psychiatrist. The psychiatrist was insisting that the client's reality was not as good as his, based on the fact that he was the psychiatrist and the client was the patient. This went on for a minute or two. I found it fascinating. I wish I could have taped it, really. It would have been worth playing in classes. But the client finally said, well, why is yours better than mine? Because I'm the doctor and I said so, is what the psychiatrist said. Whoa, not the best way to gain cooperative relationship, and definitely a power and control element. So, in terms of the philosophical debate, I'd have to hand it over to the patient. Patient wins. He gets the trophy. Okay, so there's directive versus non-directive. That was very directive, by the way. Non-directive would be the over-jury and stuff. Structured versus non-structured sessions. Content versus process. Again, the engagement with the client creates the process. The content are the details of the devil. These are the issues we're working on. They're also technique versus process, because I guarantee you that whatever you're doing, informing the therapeutic alliance, you're using techniques, but yet there's a process that stems from the technique. And then there's, of course, transference and countertransference issues, which we'll talk about, including being attracted to the client and vice versa. Okay, dynamics of the therapeutic relationship, but let's look at the definitions. And I went over this on a couple other PowerPoints, but at any rate, control is to direct and regulate the power. You dominate. Power is simply influencing another at some level. So directing and influencing another towards specific directions or goals. That's what we're doing. Resistance, I like to call reluctance, but resistance in the books are obstructions and barriers in completing goals. Now you got to realize too, I think I have it in this PowerPoint, maybe I don't, but a lot of times the therapist will make the muck in the mess. They will put up the obstructions and the barriers, like the psychiatrist heavily emphasizing or yelling at the client, the patient, that his reality is better than his. So that's putting up a lot of barriers and obstructions and not getting cooperation. In fact, getting reluctance to do anything. Okay. So, by definition, the therapist is already in a power position because the client, by definition of our social context, comes in saying, I have a problem, I need your help. Then, of course, we then form an alliance. At another level, the therapist decides how to work with the client, which could definitely be an equalitarian relationship and approach. A cooperative is what you want, which is some of the hallmark of the Adlerian work. The goal is to elicit, gain cooperation to help client facilitate change. The client's needs, goals, and problems, responsivity, etc., are all taken into consideration. The client comes to the therapist for help of some sort. The therapist then responds by providing help of some sort, thus defining the relationship and the nature of this relationship. So connection with the client really requires a couple of different things. It's a rapport, it's a connection. That's the essence of the therapeutic relationship alliance, connecting with the client and maintaining that connection. There's compassion and empathy, which are techniques that the therapist uses. Gaining cooperation is a whole set of motivational interviewing type techniques, if you will. It's all about communication or conversations, and at this point, I can make a plug in for our book on reluctance. Um, so, oh yeah, working with reluctant clients is the title of it. I think I don't even know what the hell the title is, but you can see it on Amazon. Okay, so being responsive to the client's needs, personality, etc. Sometimes modeling a parental figure. I model a parental figure to people 25, 30 years older than me and still had their marbles. So the therapeutic validation is another piece of it. Support the system as therapists and while you're inducing some type of change. Viewing resistance as reluctance. To me, resistance has a connotation of being stubborn, being obstinate of change. Where reluctance is, yeah, I'm thinking about it, but for whatever reason, I'm not ready to cross over yet. The utilization principle, important. Use the client's behavior towards goals. So use some interventions and stuff. Doesn't go as planned. Instead of having a pity party and talking to your neighbor about how shitty your clients are because you didn't have the outcome you were looking for, you can then. I was just joking about that, by the way, because we do not talk about clients to our neighbors. That is a rule within the therapeutic relationship and field. But just saying, instead of thinking that everything's dismal, use it towards the goals. Monitor. It should be monitor. Transference and countertransference. Stuff does happen. I know the Adlerians don't really believe in it, but it does happen. Utilization, I mentioned already. So motivation to do something. That's all within that connection with the client. So we're looking at process variables. Bill Marshall did some extensive research in England, actually, with his grad students, and in the sexual aggression field because the UK had standardized program. They did things very standardized. So he's trying to figure out what elements of the therapist, what's the style that makes things work. I do not know all the numbers and details of his particular research, but they did publish a couple papers on it, and it's in their books as well. At any rate, being empathetic was one. Being warm and kind is another. Ask open-ended questions, then you get more info. When you ask closed-ended, you get either or response. to some degree with flexibility. You have to be flexible. You have to adapt to the situation. You got to be pliable, if you will. Genuine to a degree. I could tell you one thing: if you're working with a client you don't like them, they will come across. So you want to be genuine to some degree. They can also clients are good at picking up fakeness as well. So if you come off with some fake persona, they're going to call you on bullshit because that's what it is. Um, what happened in a group, a new social worker entered the group. We were doing group. These guys were used to doing some group. And so we, at that point, well, many years ago, went around the group. They introduced themselves and what they did. This one guy kind of went in a little detail of victim types and such. And the new social worker therapist had a ucky face come across. He stopped and said, "If you do not like us, why are you working with us?" Of course, she didn't have a response. It was like a deer in a headlight type situation. And so I just said, "Dude, you don't like what you did, right?" "Oh, I hate it. It's just gross. It's just disgusting, etc." I said, "Well, she doesn't like what you did. It's not about you. It's what you did." She says, "Okay, let's do group." But the point is, be prepared. Anyway, be confident, not narcissistic. Be attentive to what's going on. Encourage participation. Don't cut it off. Be rewarding. Reward positive responses. Being trustworthy to self-disclosing to a degree. Degree in that one camp used to say disclose all. Another camp used to say disclose none. So if you're going to self-disclose something, do do it for a therapeutic purpose. Remember, you're not the client. If you have issues and you would like to tell the client your issues and make the session about you, well, then go find your own freaking therapist. Okay, so uh, that's on self-disclosing. So, and once